I'm talking to Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, who are currently signing a huge amount of books in Forbidden Planet,
yes,
heroically. You
guys,
guys,
for multitasking.
Absolutely nothing wrong with that. You guys have been working together for a couple of decades now.
Yeah, and I bloody hate him. Always late, expects his dinner on the table. I just don't know.
And the kind of comics that you've worked on have kind of run the gamut of horror stories, of franchise work, science fiction, more sort of esoteric British titles. But most recently, I guess you've made a big impact in the Marvel universe with your take on the more science fictional side of Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
When it came to setting up the whole kind of Annihilation crossover and all its various spin-offs to start off with, how did that come about?
Initially, it came about because we were invited to do it. It's as simple as that. We've always loved the cosmic stuff, the cosmic superheroes, Warlock and Captain Marvel and stuff. So it was something that we'd sort of talked to Marvel about the idea that we would do some stuff, particularly on for a while we were going to do a Nova series, and then never turned into anything. And then Giffen actually was in charge of doing the first Annihilation event, which was meant to breathe some new life back into the cosmic books. And we got, because our previous bid to do a Nova thing, the editor of the line, Andy Schmidt, said, "Would you like to do the Nova miniseries?" So we just did 4 issues with Kev Walker on that. Loved it, and it would prove to be a particularly popular part of it. And they said, "Yes, do you want to do some more? Do an ongoing, create the next Annihilation event?" And essentially we started to build our cosmic run piece by piece on the back of that. It was really a case of doing one thing. If it worked, we'd get to do another thing, and hence Guardians of the Galaxy, Conquest, War of Kings, and everything we've done, currently leading through to, we've just signed copies of it, Annihilators, which is where we've reached now. So with many of these things, it starts with an invitation, or it starts with being in the right place at the right time, and then tapping into your own enthusiasm for it.
And the thing with Nova, which was quite interesting, I thought you mentioned, was the fact that we'd pitched for a Nova series a few years before that with Chris Bautista, who unfortunately, well, good for him, but unfortunately for the project, moved off to DC and signed an exclusive contract with them. So we were already in a Nova mindset. We already had plans and story outlines in place prior to doing the Annihilation thing, and we'd done that for Andy Schmidt. So, like I said, it was like a lucky break that we'd already done that. He remembered that, liked that, and we then got to actually do it and play with it, which was great fun.
And presumably, since you had pitched them a Nova idea, the more SFNal side of the Marvel universe was something that already appealed to you.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Both Andy and I had grown up reading, like I said, Captain Marvel, Warlock, Jim Starlin, basically, but also the other seminal work, I think, was the original Star-Lord story that Claremont and Byrne had done, which I remember reading in reprint in Star Wars Weekly, because obviously in the UK you're getting things in a different format. And we both, I think, have quite a British sensibility about what SF means, but also the idea that to us, although we're quite happy with superheroes, and that works really, really well. If you put a Superman in a sort of man in tights in a real world situation, it can often be slightly odd. But a superhero in space, it's more often that his costume is just what he's wearing. It's his uniform or whatever. Nova to us was a space cop in a uniform. He's not a superhero in a costume. So that oddly, the incredibility of it adds a layer of credibility to it. You can have people doing things where actually this is business as usual. It's very exciting from our standpoint because it looks wonderful and spectacular. But it's actually more about a world where people are super strong because they're aliens, or they've got power armor, or they've got things like that. So it allows you to fashion a sort of universe that is sort of more credible with its own consistent rules. It did a little bit of corner world building. The other great thing, of course, about writing the cosmic stories for Marvel is that they weren't popular characters. These weren't. This wasn't a line of books that had a lot of attention. So we were sort of free to do just about anything we wanted to.
Yeah, and the good thing with that as well was anything could go, because nobody had any ties to those characters. There wasn't years and years of continuity where they'd been in a regular book for decades, and so there's no way they're going to kill these characters. I think that's what made it even more interesting and slightly edgy from the reader's point of view. Any one of our characters could die because
and
there was no
did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we would. I mean, lovely though it is to write the JLA or the Avengers. When you're writing Guardians of the Galaxy, these are third or fourth rank characters that have been forgotten about. People praise you if you do something with them that is unexpected, but also it means that I think there was a real expectation after a while with the readers that they pick up a next issue. They literally didn't know what we were going to do next, and we did some fairly. No, neither did we. We made it up as we went along. But there's a genuine sense of sort of shock and surprise, which I think is a wonderful thing for a comic to deliver, where each issue will have a major turn, not just because it needs a cliffhanger, but just because you can take the story off in directions where people are going, I can't believe they did that, I must come back and see what they do next. So.
I mean, obviously you guys have a decent following, regardless of what comic you're working on. It's generally pretty successful. But do you think it was a surprise to Marvel that the science fiction side of their universe, once people actually started exploring the stories that could be told, was suddenly as popular as it was?
Yeah, absolutely. The cosmic stories have always been regarded as sort of the Marmite of comics. You either love cosmic stories or you hate it. We had the advantage of having done 5 years on Legion of Superheroes for DCU. It's like hard labour, isn't it? But space comics were not sort of new territory for us. And I think Marvel were delighted to see an audience brought back to a range of characters that generally regarded as not very popular or very 1970s or this kind of stuff. And they absolutely don't need to be at all. I think once you've grounded them I think the moment you start joining some of the dots together and saying, it's not we're going to visit the Skrulls this week, but here are the Skrulls, and the Skrulls are doing this in relation to the Kree who are doing this, and you actually build a little landscape, and you start moving around with those and have recurring characters. People suddenly get very interested in it again.
Yeah, I think it's also there's what you're saying about doing world building is that there's a cohesive Marvel universe out there in the cosmic universe. There are the Kree, there are the Shi'ar, and they've all had stories written about them. So, in respect of there's a sort of geopolitical setup in Marvel on Earth, there was in the cosmic universe, and we just got to play with all those. And so, in some ways, we said we were just doing a massive space opera, almost like Dune, where you're dealing with planets as countries, and mixing and matching them and bringing in external threats for them, and getting to deal with all of the intrigue that would bring onto the table.
I think the latter crossovers that we did, War of Kings, which was the sort of war between the Shi'ar and the Kree, and then the Thanos Imperative. Both of those I'm very proud of, because I think they are, in superhero terms, they are meant to be sort of like epic space operas, with the emphasis on space operas like soap operas. They are about dynastic struggles and sort of intrigue and court intrigue and double cross and that kind of stuff. And so there was some of the things that we did there which I think people just didn't expect. Ronan the Accuser is a terribly unsympathetic character. By the end of War of Kings, he's one of the most sympathetic characters in it, and people are engaged with him and think he's really interesting. And I think that's quite nice. You reverse people's expectations with the character, so that although he's probably the hardest nosed member of the Annihilators, he's still, the idea he's in a hero team at all is a great surprise.
Do you find that in a way Marvel, and maybe even individual Marvel comics, because they have a certain following, can actually get away with changing genres from like one month to the next? X-Men, for example, you could have a run of stories all about the Shi'ar, which is, kind of like hard SF almost, and then you'll have a run about Wolverine fighting ninjas in Japan. And you'd think that these two things would have very different audiences, and yet the number of people who buy it doesn't suddenly drop off when you go from one kind of genre to the next.
No, I don't think. I think that's the thing about superheroes. Superheroes do cover all sorts of different genres, from the sort of actual vigilante action to the space opera to the horror, whatever it is. And so if you've got strong popular characters like the X-Men or the JLA, then you can run through all those things, and it's almost like there's almost a desire and need creatively saying it's about time you did a space story, it's about time you did a horror story, it's about time just to go run through, like Doctor Who would or Star Trek would do. We need one of a darker tone this week. We need a funny one. We need an epic one. We need a small scale one. You sort of vary it because what the consistency is given with the characters. I think the great risk, as it were, with a cosmic superhero book is that you stay in that cosmic province forever, and that is your default setting. And what you've got to prove is that still provides you with the variety of story types, so that it doesn't get sort of dull. Really, and that is quite difficult. And the trick there is to build up, as it were, a consistent background that represents what in Spider-Man would be the real world, would be New York. Once you've got that setting that remains the same. So in Guardians of the Galaxy is a good example. We created Nowhere, the floating celestial head that they lived in. There's someone they could always go back to. It was our TARDIS. It was our Enterprise. It gave us a secure footing. So there was always a default setting to go back to. They weren't just random people drifting around in space.
And again, also the other touchstone that I think we definitely made a conscious effort once we'd gone beyond Annihilation, we were actually building a sort of meta story to the whole thing, was to try to make the characters as interesting as possible. You know, because again, it could be, the setting can be as wild and wacky as possible, as long as you've got an interesting touchstone character, like we did with Nova in the first Annihilation, we did with Peter Quill, Star-Lord in Annihilation Conquest, and then during the course of the run of Guardians of the Galaxy, we put in Jack Flag as a sort of human character through which the readers can relate all this wackiness through the eyes of somebody who's seeing it as if from their point of view, and you know, I think that was something we definitely made a conscious effort to play out, didn't we?
Yeah, yes, absolutely right. I think the biggest spectacle in the world is fine for a while, but unless you've got human characters to identify with, or human-esque characters with human qualities, so you know, putting very real people like Richard Rider and Peter Quill in the stories was great, and then to put them up against characters who clearly weren't from Earth, but had some feelings in common. So I mean, you know, Rocket Raccoon, for instance. I mean, you know, really, but I mean that shouldn't work at all. And it was very silly. And they said, "Put Rocket Raccoon in," and we went, "Really? Okay." But you quickly come to love him because you find, okay, let's humanise him with certain things, and then make him very alien in his approach to other things. So, in fact, some of the most interesting characters I think in Guardians of the Galaxy were some of the sort of female alien characters like Moondragon and Gamora and Mantis, who were very human in some ways, but very. I mean, Gamora being very ruthless, Mantis being incredibly empathic. Great fun characters to write because they would suddenly sort of surprise you by doing something or behaving in a way that you weren't expecting them to do. So I think that, you know.
And you spoke about how the different planets, you can start thinking about the different politics that are going on from one to the other and create a landscape. At the same time, the Marvel Universe continues by itself on Earth with the various things that are going on, which means that you have weird little intersections that in the middle of a spacey story you can have Nova go back to Earth and the Civil War is taking place. Was that actually quite a fun thing to do, or did it feel a little bit like we're actually changing the rules as we go along in a way, because we're saying these are the space stories and they don't interact with the Marvel Universe? Oh, actually, let's show that they can.
Well, the thing is, we did that. That was deliberately what we did with that story, and we're about to do it again with the Annihilators in the new series called Earthfall, where they go back to Earth and meet the Avengers. That was probably the most important story we did in Nova, because we established he's a wonderful space hero, brought him back to Earth, and everybody went, "Oh my gosh, you've changed." So our approach to Nova was to say, actually, he knows he's a third-rate hero, and he's not very important, and then upgrade his powers, and he becomes this huge hero of this space war that no one on Earth knows about. So when he comes home, they go, goodness me, he's taller and more heroic. You know, he's suddenly a premier. We made him a Premier Division character by making people say he's now a Premier Division character. And you know, Earth scrambled because this alien had turned up, and Iron Man has to go and meet him and say, what's happened to you, and all this kind of stuff. And he says, there's been this enormous war in space. And they go, we knew nothing about it. And so you actually make a virtue out of the character, the character's perception, and the disconnect between the cosmic and that. And that again is part of the point of what we're doing with Earthfall. When the Alliances turn up, they say, you know, you have no idea that what's
Your
been
Earth
happening.
problems are so insignificant.
It's so insignificant, and we've just been dealing with Thanos, and the universe nearly ended. You know, where were you? And the Avengers are going, you know, get off our planet. You know, you can't come in here like this. And it actually becomes a much more interesting story rather than that kind of, oh, we met and accidentally had a fight, and then realised we were on the same side. It actually becomes about two people with essentially the same goal, or two teams of people with the same goal that actually conflict slightly because of their perspective on things.